Hello everybody, welcome back to UK Gaming Network. I'm Brian, also known as UK Gen Zoidberg, and this is Retro Game Super Leagues, where we rank all of the games in a certain category. The category in this episode being overhead shooters on the Amiga. I've got 43 games I think to go through on this list, so rather than sit here blabbering on, I'm just going to get on with it. So as always, the games that I'm going to be going through on this list are going to be ranked in one of 5 categories. They're going to be essential, recommended, good, poor or rubbish. So the first game that we're going to come to is Alien Bash, which was actually released on a cover disc with the one Amiga back in 1993, developed by a guy called Glenn Cumming. Readily available on public domain. You can probably find this one fairly easily to download online. But graphically it's incredibly basic, but the gameplay is actually pretty good fun once you get used to the controls. The first level basically takes the form of your standard arena shooter before the game then opens out into levels where you actually walk around and explore a little bit more. It's definitely worth a play, especially as you can download it for free. But I can't really put this any higher than the good category, so that's where it's going to go. So that game was followed up 3 years later by Alien Bash 2, which was released on the cover disc for Amiga Format magazine this time. And the fact that it's a free public domain game probably gives the game a free pass, with the fact that it's a shameless Chaos Engine ripoff, especially in the graphics. It is also very enjoyable. The action is fast and smooth and playable, and the levels are incredibly well designed. There's some nice enemy designs in there as well, including some pretty decent boss fights. So whereas the first game was very basic, this one is much better. So this one's going to go in the recommended category. Now we come to Alien Breed, released in 1991 by Team 17. This was a much imitated and very highly celebrated entry in this genre. Obviously really heavily inspired by James Cameron's Aliens, certainly in the design of the creatures that you're shooting at. The exploration element of the gameplay makes this one that you want to return to time and time again. Every time you activate the self-destruct on each one of the game's levels, there is a frantic rush back to the deck lift and get out. And playing it, if you play it on your own, it's really good fun, but playing it with 2 players is even better. I am going to stick this one in the recommended category though, rather than the essential, simply because of what came after it. This one's going to go above Alien Bash 2. Now, Alien Breed was followed up by a special edition released the following year in 1992. This one was released at budget price, and it is essentially more of the same. It's just it doesn't require the original game to play it. The graphics are identical, but the level designs are all completely different, so it is essentially a brand new game. Whether it's actually better than the original Alien Breed is entirely open to interpretation. For me, I think this one is a slight improvement, but there are elements of the first game that I prefer. I mean, the opening level on the first game is better than the opening level on this one, for instance. So this one is also going to go in the recommended category, but it's only going to go just above the game that it followed. Now we come to Alien Breed 2: The Horror Continues, which was released in 1993. Once again developed by Team 17, and certainly in terms of the graphics, this is probably the best work that Rico Holmes did in the entire series. Unfortunately, this is a game where my entire experience of it has been tarred forever by how utterly terrible the first level is, and no matter how good the rest of the game gets beyond that, that's always in the back of my mind every time I load it up and try and play it. If you're going to play it, play the A1200 version, because that one looks even better, but I can't put this one anywhere other than the good category, simply because the opening level is, for me, probably the worst start that a game has ever had in gaming history. So this one's going to go above Alien Bash in the good category. And now we come to Alien Breed Tower Assault, which was released in 1994, and this is basically everything that the series had done well up until this point, put into one game, and then enhanced even further by allowing the player to explore the entire map of the game in whichever order they want. And it makes the game infinitely replayable. But once again, playing it with 2 players is the preferred way to play it. And the introduction of a control where you could click the second button on a 2-button joystick to
flip around and shoot behind yourself was an absolute stroke of genius. So for me, easily the best one in the Alien Breed series, and so this one is going straight into the Essential category. Now we come to Alien Syndrome, which was released on the Amiga in 1988 from Softtech International, based on the Sega arcade machine. And I mean, as conversions go, this is actually pretty decent, capturing the speed and playability of the arcade original. Unfortunately, it's slightly ruined by the graphics being a little bit on the basic side, and the push scrolling is a really bad idea that doesn't really fit the game at all. It's still enjoyable, and it has a two-player mode just like Alien Breed. So for me, this one is also going to go in the good category, but I think it's not as good as Alien Breed 2, so I'm going to put it just above Alien Bash. Next, we come to the first of quite a few budget titles on this list. This is Arie II, released in 1993 from Zeppelin Games. The first Arie game was a side-scrolling run-and-gun shooter. This one, and like many sequels on the Amiga, the second game was nothing like the original. This one has a fairly nice isometric viewpoint, but the collision detection is absolutely atrocious. It's also incredibly difficult to avoid being shot at times, and there are elements of the scenery that you feel like you should be able to walk behind, but the game never lets you. And it basically gives away the fact that this is a budget title. So it's not really that enjoyable, so this one's going to go in the poor category. Next up, we have Captain Fizz, which is an incredibly basic looking shooter released in 1988, developed by Psygnosis but released on their arcade sister label Cyclops. Just like Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge, this is a game that's been designed for 2 players, and if you play it solo, then you're left with half of the screen being used for nothing. But everything about this game does not look like a 16-bit game at all. I mean, the graphics would have looked pretty terrible on a Commodore 64. They don't move particularly smoothly, and there's a lot of flickering on the enemies. If you can play it with 2 players, then that's obviously the best way to go. But to be honest, I don't think you should be playing this one at all. So this one's going to go in the rubbish category. Next up, we come to the Chaos engine, released in 1993, developed by the Bitmap brothers and published by Renegade. This is an absolute classic of the Amiga, and there's no other way of putting it, really. I mean, the graphics are excellent, the sound and music are superb, and the level design is excellent, with plenty of secrets to discover that make you want to play it over and over again. If I was going to nitpick, I would say that the AI of the second player, if you're playing it on your own, is a little bit annoying in the way that he'll run around and pick up stuff that you want to pick up yourself. But as I said, that's a minor nitpick. There's nowhere this game can go other than the Essential category, and I'm probably going to put it above Alien Breed Tower Assault. Next up, we have another game based on a Sega arcade game. This was Crackdown, not to be confused with the Microsoft published open world game that came out in the 2000s. This is a split screen 2-player base infiltration shooter, and it's surprisingly good fun, especially if you can play it 2 players. Arc Developments did a fairly decent job of converting it to the Amiga. The graphics are a little bit messy in places, and once again, just like Captain Fizz, if you are playing it on single player, then the right hand side of the screen has nothing in it. So it would have been nice to open out the game to full screen if you're playing it on your own, but the arcade original didn't do that, so it's understandable why they didn't. But there's no way this one can go really other than the good category. It can't put it any higher than that. And I'm going to put it above the original Alien Bash. Next up, we have Cyber Blast, which came out in 1990, released by Enterprise, the people that made Battle Squadron. And one of the things that happened on a regular basis during the 16-bit gaming era was shameless rip-offs, and this is one of them. This gets away with being a shameless rip-off of Gauntlet, though, by changing the setting to a sci-fi one. So rather than running around dungeons and using magic, you are now running around spaceships using laser guns and killing aliens. Other than that, the gameplay is 100% Gauntlet. it's pretty decent fun as well, I must admit. I mean, the graphics are nice and colourful, and the level designs are pretty decent, and there's a lot of them. So this one's going to go in the good category, and I think I'm going to put this one above Alien Syndrome. Now we come to Cyberpunks, released in 1993. Had the misfortune to come out just after the Chaos Engine, so a lot of people probably didn't play this one. Was published by Core Design and developed by Mutation Software, who are actually a pretty prolific Amiga developer. They're still going today, as you'll see in a second. It's got some nice cartoon graphics, and the way that you control 3 characters at once, with 2 of them following your exact moves, makes this one stand out a little bit from the competition. What I didn't like was the way that the game handles your inventory management, with you constantly having to press the spacebar to switch between characters as to who's carrying what, and that kind of goes against the fast action of the gameplay throughout the rest of it. It's still very enjoyable and playable and fast, so it's definitely not a rubbish game. This one is also going to go in the good category, and I think I would probably put this one above Alien Breed 2. Next up, we have Cyberpunks 2, which came out in 2023. Yes, just last year. A 30-year gap between original and sequel. The gameplay is almost identical to the first. You still control a group of 3 characters, but in this one, the AI is slightly more akin to what you got in the Chaos Engine, with the characters not following you exactly, but doing a little bit of their own thing. For me, the graphics on this one are actually not quite as appealing as they were in the original Cyberpunks, but the level design is actually better. So it's a very close run thing as to which game people will prefer between this game and the first one, just like with the Alien Breed Special Edition. And for me, I think I just prefer the original Cyberpunks to this one, so this one is still definitely worth a play, and I'm going to put it just below the first Cyberpunks. Next up, we have Cyber Zerk, released in 1993 from Century Interactive, and this is one of those times where the title of the game is probably not quite as clever as the developers thought. I spent the first couple of hours that I was playing this game trying to work out what a Zerk was, and whether that was the name of the alien race that you were fighting against. It was only when I got around to recording the clips for this video and took a close look at the title screen that I actually realised that it's the word berserk with Psy in front of it. So the developers probably thought that they were quite clever with their play on words on that one. Didn't really work for me though. This is a fairly good looking and playable flick screen exploration shooter, and it's thankfully really easy to find your way around the levels. I wasn't a fan of the way that it links the levels by just having chevrons on the floor rather than a doorway, but ultimately there are definitely going to be better games on this list than this one. So this one is going to go in the good category as well, and I think I'm going to put this one just above Alien Syndrome. Next up, we have Cytron, or Citron, depending on how you want to pronounce it, released by Psygnosis and developed by Lunatic Software in 1992. You can instantly tell that this was a game by Psygnosis by the game's colour scheme, where all of the enemies have a completely different palette to the backgrounds, and which admittedly does make them stand out, but it's also a little bit jarring. It's all very fast and smooth though, and playable, and I did actually really enjoy this one. I think the power-up system could have been a little bit better, because it's annoying that you have to go to a computer terminal to switch weapons and activate the power-ups that you picked up, rather than having them just activate the moment you collect them. I would actually recommend this one, so I'm going to put this one at the bottom of the recommended category, just below Alien Bash 2. Next up, we have Deathbots, which came out in 1990, published by Anko and developed by Odyssey Software, and this is utterly terrible. There is no way to describe it. There's a complete disconnect between the viewing angle of the level itself and the characters within it, and consequently the collision detection is absolutely awful. I mean, something as simple as getting through a doorway is overly fiddly, and that should not be the case for a game of this type. So the best thing that you can do really is forget that this game exists. This one is going to go straight in the rubbish category, and it's definitely worse than Captain Fizz. Next up we have Enlightenment Druid 2, released in 1988 by Bullfrog Productions, and in 1988 this was a fairly decent game. Unfortunately, it has aged really badly. I mean, the graphics are still pretty decent, especially considering when the game was made, but the fact that the on-screen HUD takes up almost half the screen at the bottom is quite annoying, because it takes away from what you should be able to see as you're playing it. I mean, yes, it's fairly smooth and playable, but it gets boring really quickly as far as I'm concerned. So for me, this one is going to go in the poor category, and I think I'm going to put it above Arie II. Next we come to First Contact, which was published by Rainbird in 1990, and this is one of those games where it was probably a good idea in concept, but the execution is not great in the slightest. You control the 3 different parts of a robot, and the idea being that you're trying to reconnect them, and so it makes for 3 different types of overhead shooter, but none of them are particularly enjoyable. And this is once again another game that probably would have looked bad on the Commodore 64, so it doesn't look like a 16-bit game at all. So this one is also going to go in the rubbish category, but I think it's better than the 2 games that are in there already, but only just. So it's going to go above Captain Fizz. Next up we have Future Tank, which came out in 1988 from Rainbow Arts and Time Warp Productions, just before they went on and made Great Guyana Sisters. This is probably the closest that any of the games on this list get to being a pure arcade game. The idea being that you just drive around in your tank and shoot the other tanks, with the objective being of just clearing the level of all enemies before moving on to the next. It's not terrible, but it is also a game that I got bored of very quickly. The graphics are okay, but the scrolling quite jerky, so it makes it quite difficult to look at. So it's not quite bad enough to go in the rubbish category, but it's definitely poor. And I think I would probably rather play this than Arie II, so I'll put it above that one. Next we come to Galactic Warrior RS, which is another budget title, but this one does not look like it in the slightest. It's actually a really enjoyable and actually quite strategic shooter. Basically you control a team of 3 warrior rats who roll around the levels in their power balls, and there's a good strategic element to the gameplay where as you shoot enemies, they drop money, and you can go back to the shop where you start the levels at any point and upgrade your weapons constantly, and it's recommended that you do so. The way that the ball rolls around the level is actually quite good fun, although the momentum does mean that avoiding enemy bullets is quite tricky at times. So not one that that's going to go in the recommended category, but it's definitely a good game, and I think I'm probably going to put this one just below Cyberblast. Now we come to yet another shameless rip-off. This is Garrison, released in 1987 by Rainbow Arts and Digital Dreams. This was obviously released to try and fill the gap in the market by the fact that the Amiga did not yet have a version of Gauntlet all of its own. The 2 biggest problems for this game, though, are: 1, the graphics are incredibly basic and don't look nice at all, and 2, it's unbearably slow to play. Everything moves at a snail's pace, and even if you're playing it 2-player, then you're going to get incredibly bored very quickly. I did not play this game back in the 80s. I've only played this game today for the purposes of making this list, but I can't see how anybody could have liked this one back in the day. This one is going to go in the rubbish category, but I'm going to put it above the games that are in there already. Another element of gaming in the late 80s was that sequels would come out almost straight away. So Garrison II came out also in 1987, same developer, same publisher, same problems. Basically, it's what would probably be called a data disk in some instances, but it doesn't require the original game to play. If you were to play this game and the first game side by side, they're virtually indistinguishable from each other. They both move incredibly slowly. So this one's going to go in the rubbish category as well, but because it's a sequel that doesn't even improve anything, is going to go below the first. And now we come to the game that inspired Garrison. This is Gauntlet II.
This was published by US Gold in 1988, and this is the real deal. This is what you want from a Gauntlet game. The action is fast and playable. If you plug in a couple of extra joystick ports into the serial port on your Amiga and play it 4-player, it's probably one of the most enjoyable experiences that you can get. Gameplay wise, Gauntlet as an arcade game hasn't aged especially well, but this was always the best home version of it that you could play. If you can get a friend to come and play it with you, then this one for me will go in the recommended category, but it's going to go below all the games that are in there already. Now we come to Into the Eagle's Nest, which came out in 1987 from Pandora, and when it came to playing this game on the Spectrum, this was one of my favourite games on the system. I really enjoyed this one on the Spectrum. The Amiga version, however, is a frankly appalling conversion of it. Once again, the developers have inexplicably decided that push scrolling is the way to go, and the graphics barely seem like they've been updated from the Spectrum version. You can just about see the game that I really enjoyed previously underneath all of it, but only just, and it's only that stops it from going in the rubbish category, so I'm going to put it at the bottom of the pile. Next we come to Jurassic Park the game, released in 1993 by Ocean Software. This was available in two different versions. You had the Amiga 500 version and the Amiga 1200 version. To all intents and purposes they were exactly the same game, just the Amiga version, the 1200 version had better graphics, but the A1200 version also added some really tense first-person sections that made that game easier to recommend. As far as the Gauntlet style overhead shooter that makes up the rest of the game, that's the only part that you get on the A500, and that part is fairly enjoyable, even if it is far too easy to get lost, and the important items that you need to be picking up in order to complete the levels and move on to the next are not always obvious. It does look very nice though, regardless of which version that you play, and fans of the film will probably find things to enjoy in it. So this is going to go in the good category, and I think I'll probably put this one just above Galactic Warrior RS. Next we come to Leaving Teramis, which came out in 1990 from Thalion, and this is a game that I found incredibly difficult to get any enjoyment out of whatsoever. And the main reason for that is that it's never entirely obvious what you are supposed to be doing. A number of times while playing it, I got a game over message with no obvious reason as to why that happened, and that made it incredibly frustrating to play. I mean, the graphics as well aren't that great. The detail on the levels is okay, but the actual enemy characters and sprites don't really feel like they belong. And so for me, I'm going to put this one in the poor category, and I think I'll probably put this one just above Future Tank. Now we come to Merks, released in 1991 from US Gold and developed by Tiermaker, and that kind of thing would normally be a red flag to any Amiga owner, but Tiermaker actually did a pretty decent job of converting this one. This one is almost as enjoyable as the arcade version, with obvious caveats, and the fact that everything is now controlled via a single button, and because of the tate view that the arcade version had with the screen, you've got a very slim play area right in the middle of your telly with massive black bars down the side. But that doesn't detract from how enjoyable it is, especially if you can play it 2-player. So somewhat surprisingly, this one is going to go in the good category, and I think I'm going to put it's definitely a better conversion than both Alien Syndrome and Crackdown. I'm probably going to put this one just below Jurassic Park. Next up we have Miami Chase, which came out in 1990, published by Codemasters, and this was developed by the same team that would go on to become Team 17, who were just known as Team 7 at the time. Programmer Andreas Tadek and artist Rico Holmes. Now, if you were to just look at the title screen and screenshots of this game, you would probably think, why are you putting this one in the overhead shooter category? It looks like a driving game. The gameplay is very much a shooter. You drive your car at high speed around the city,
You don't control it in the way that you would control the car normally in a racing game. You simply push the direction that you want to move, and the objective is to locate specific target cars around the city and shoot them and blow them up. So it's definitely a shooter. It's also not a very good one. The presentation, as you would expect from the team that would go on to make Alien Breed, are all of a pretty high standard. But the game is incredibly frustrating to play, not least the fact that you keep constantly getting stopped by other police officers, and every time you do, the game will load up a single screen with exactly the same text on it every time, and it gets really frustrating every time it happens. So that drops it into the poor category for me, and I am going to put this one just below Druid 2. Next up we have Mini Legion, which came out in 2018 from a developer called Iron Gate, and this is incredibly disappointing because when I looked at the game I thought, oh, that looks like it could be really good fun. Unfortunately, this is one of the most boring games that I have played in a long time. Like the two Garrison games, it moves at an achingly slow pace. That in itself would not be a problem if it wasn't for the fact that the levels are completely empty. So you're finding yourself wandering around strips of desert in the vain hope that you're going to have something to shoot at. And it's a shame because graphically it's pretty decent, even if the scrolling is pretty jerky though. There's absolutely nothing here to recommend. So this one is also going to go in the poor category, and I think I'm going to put this one just above Arie II. Now we come to Paradroid 90, released in 1990 by Hewson and developed by GraphGold. And this is probably one of the most well-known games on this list. This is actually one of the games that is pre-installed on the A500 Mini when should you buy one. I must admit that I have zero experience of the original Paradroid on the Commodore 64, so I am coming at this one from the perspective of somebody to who this was a completely new experience, and I honestly can't understand why people think this game is a classic. I mean, the visuals have a nice 16-bit sheen to them, and the concept of taking over control of the enemy robots by beating them at a little mini game is pretty decent fun for about half an hour. But then I started to realise that I didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing other than that, and the manual was no help whatsoever. So it pains me to say it, but I did not enjoy this one in the slightest, and I'm going to put this one right at the top of the poor category. Next up we have Rage, which was released as a shareware title in 1994, published by Scorpius and from a programmer called Mark Shiki, and this one took me completely by surprise. It was not a game that I'd heard of previously, but it's very fast, it's very smooth, and it's very playable. What lets it down slightly is that the shooting side of the gameplay is not quite as accurate as you would want it to be, and when it comes to the exploration of the levels, it unfortunately turns out that there is actually only one way to go. It is, however, definitely a game that I would want to return to and play again, and so for that reason it's one that I would definitely recommend. And I probably would put, and I think I am going to put this one above Cyron. Next up we come to Rambo III, which was released by Ocean Software, and just like the film that inspired it, this is one that is nowhere near as good as Rambo II. And in this instance I am referring to the Rambo II game that came out on the Spectrum, which was a really enjoyable Commando clone, but this one is a really slow-moving flick-screen bore fest. I mean, the character of John Rambo is supposed to be a lethal killing machine, but here he just seems to saunter around the levels without a care in the world. There's almost nothing about this game that makes it one that you should play, and I've got no idea why the Taito logo is on the title screen, because I don't ever recall there being an arcade game that was like this. So this one is going to go in the rubbish category as well, and I think I'm going to put this one above the two Garrison games. One game that I do remember being in the arcades was Data East: The Real Ghostbusters, and the Amiga conversion of it was released by Activision in 1989, developed internally by Software Studios. Everywhere that I looked online, I could not find the names of the people responsible for this absolute travesty, and I would not be surprised if they wished to remain anonymous. This is an unbelievably bad arcade conversion, based on the cartoon Ghostbusters TV series. The graphics are utterly shambolic. I cannot work out for the life of me where I'm supposed to go. and what the scenery is actually supposed to represent. So this is easily the worst game on this entire list. So this is going to go right down at the bottom of the rubbish category. Do not play it. Next up we have Rebellion, which is a single screen shooter released by budget publisher Players, and this came out in 1992. And the objective of each level is to destroy all the enemies as quickly as you can and rescue enough of the humans in order to progress to the next level. The concept is a good one, and the execution is also pretty decent as well. Unfortunately, it's another game that is spoiled slightly by the slow movement of the central character. If everything was just slightly faster than it is here, then it would be 1,000 times more enjoyable. But it's still not quite bad enough to go into the poor category. So I think I am going to put it in the good category, and it's definitely on a par with Alien Bash. So I'll put it just above that one. Next up we have Rooster, which came out in 1994, developed by the Polish developer TSA and released by Mirage Media. And once again we find ourselves with a game that is fairly good looking. It's smooth, it's playable. It's unfortunately ridiculously slow moving, and there's not a huge amount of enemies on screen to make it in any way exciting. It's a game that I got bored of very, very quickly. The simple fact of the matter is that there's no reason to play this game when there are so many better games in this category to play instead. And for that reason, I am going to put it in the poor category, and I think I'm going to put it just above Miami Chase. Next we come to Rotox, which was released by US Gold in 1990 and developed by Creative Materials. This is a game where the concept is better than the execution. If you think of what the overhead sections of Contra 3 on the SNES were with the rotation, it's basically that, where the entire level rotates around your character rather than the other way around. And unfortunately, the 3D graphics are nowhere near fast and smooth enough to make the game in any way enjoyable. Put this one down as a failed experiment, but it's unfortunately not one that you should be playing. And this one is also going to go in the poor category, and I'm going to put it below Leaving Teramis. Next up, we have a game called Spherical Worlds, which came out in 1996, published by Neo Software, and from a developer called Formatted. And like Galactic Warrior RS, this is one where you roll around the levels as a ball. If you can keep the speed and momentum up as you're moving around, it makes the game more enjoyable if you can do so. The presentation is a little bit on the bland side, with the graphics being lacking a lot of colour and the sound effects being pretty unimaginative. But that doesn't stop it from being a game that I enjoyed a little. I think I will put this one in the good category, but only just. And I think I'm probably going to put this one above Crackdown. Next up we come to Universal Warrior, which is released in 1993 by Zeppelin Games, and this is quite possibly the best game that Zeppelin Games ever made. And in 1993, if you found yourself playing this one, you would probably be shocked. You would have probably been shocked to realise who made it. This is a really smooth, really fast-moving, really playable, really fun shooter. And the levels are really fun to explore as well. I've always said that you shouldn't really judge a game by how much it costs, and this is one of those examples that proves it. So yes, it may well have been a budget title, but it's still better than the vast majority of the games here. And I think I'm going to stick this one in the recommended category above Cyron. Next up, we have another arcade conversion released in 1989. This one was published by Domark and developed by Console Computers. This is Vindicators, based on the Atari arcade machine. And this is probably one of the only instances where tank controls are acceptable, because you do actually control a tank. And normally that would mean that the gameplay was very slow, but here the gameplay is anything but. If you can drag a friend along as well, it's got a really good two-player mode. Atari Games definitely had a formula that they were following at the time, because games like this and Zybots and Escape from the Planet of the Robot Monsters all had a very similar structure to them. It looks good, it's playable, and it's enjoyable, so this one is going to go in the good category, and I think I'll probably put this one just below Merks. Next up we have Virocop, which was released in 1995 from Renegade and developed by Graph Gold. This has always been a favourite of mine.
The concept being that you control a tiny little robot who has entered into a computer world to eradicate them of viruses. And basically each world is based on a different genre of gaming. So the first section is sports, the second section is role-playing games, and so on. Everything about the presentation is fantastic. The graphics are superb, the music's excellent, and there's a proper arcade feel to the sound effects as well. It's not perfect. I would have liked some of the early levels to be a little bit shorter than they are, because even when you know what you're doing, getting through the first stages to the end of the level boss still takes you a good half an hour, and that for me is too long. But that's the only real downside to it all. So this one is going to go in the essential category, but I'm going to put it below Tower Assault. Next up we have Warlock the Avenger, which came out in 1990, and this is basically the same game as Enlightenment, but nowhere near as good. So the fact that I put that one in the poor category means that this one isn't going to go any higher than it. But basically, where Enlightenment was fairly enjoyable and smooth, this one is really slow and jerky. But not only that, the collision detection is really, really bad as well. And I found myself constantly getting stuck on the scenery as I was trying to get past trees and through hedges to where I was supposed to be going. So this one is also going to go in the poor category, but it's going to go down towards the bottom. I think I'm going to put this one just above Mini Legion. And for the final game on this list, we have Watchtower, which came out in 1996 from CyberArts. And I've criticised a lot of games on this list for being really slow moving, and this is the one game that's here where being slow paced is actually to the game's benefit. If this one moved any faster, I think it would be too difficult, because the way that you and a friend, if you're playing it two-player, have to methodically and slowly make your way through the levels is actually a really enjoyable challenge in this one. I think it looks pretty decent too, with the overhead graphics looking a little bit reminiscent of cannon fodder with some really nice explosions. So as far as I'm concerned, this one is going to go in the recommended category, and I think I will put this one above Rage. So there you go, that's 43 overhead shooters ranked on the Amiga. If you disagree with any of my placements, and let's face it, you probably do, then please do let me know where you would have placed the games in the comments. You can click on the link below this video and head over to the Tiermaker website and make your own. I would love for you to share that with me so that I can see your opinions. And I'm going to be back with another Retro Game Super League in 2 weeks' time. So thank you for watching this one. Make sure you give us a like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. Until next time, happy retro gaming. Bye for now.